Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. Our guest for this episode is Candace Doby, who combines a decade of research on courage with her experiences traveling the world solo and a 16-year award-winning marketing career. In this episode, we unpack what courage is, why people are not acting courageously at work, the principles of courageous leadership, and the mindsets you need to have to act courageously. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Welcome to the program, Candace.
Thank you, Charles. So happy to be here.
Let's first start by defining. What do you define courage, especially in a leadership setting, to be?
The definition that I really like to use, it comes from a courage researcher, Daniel Putman, and it quite simply says courage is a choice to face a risk for a worthy purpose. And I think that definition is so great because there are three important pieces to it. One, it's courage is your choice. So courage in the workplace, courage in the world, it's actually your personal decision to act courageously. You don't get a cookie or a gold star for doing something that someone else told you to do. So that's the first piece. We really have to do it from our own free will. And we're using our courage, or making a choice to act courageously. Really, it's to face a risk. And so that risk in the workplace, it looks like potential retaliation for saying something that is unpopular. It looks like potential isolation for wanting to implement one of your ideas and you step on your coworker's toes. It looks like judgment. Those are what the risks look like. But the reason that we take those risks is we have a worthy purpose to do so. And that worthy purpose is we want to reach our full potential. We want to see what we're made of. We're really committed to the purpose of the organization and we want to work toward it. But we have a worthy purpose that makes that risk worth taking.
I love that definition. And I love how you say there's really no substitute for courage. If you look up synonyms for courage, you'll find words like bravery, fearlessness, tenacity. And without much consideration, you can easily settle on why these values and virtues would be at your company. And they all point to determination and fierceness to help push that person past challenges in pursuit of a desired outcome. But they're separate words for a reason. And that reason is that their meanings are slightly different. So let's kind of unpack a few of those because I thought prior to reading your work that bravery and courage are one and the same thing.
Yeah, and many people, let's be honest, use them interchangeably, but they are nuanced. And that is why there are different words for them. I think bravery absolutely is, going forward and taking an action when it might be a little bit scary or you've got a little bit of fear to do so. So you're showing up despite the fear. The one thing that I think courage has that bravery doesn't have that's really, really important is courage specifies that you take a risk, that you open yourself up to judgment and failure and rejection and all of those things. You do it for a worthy purpose. So there are a lot of things out there that you can be brave about. You can be brave walking the ledge of a skyscraper building. You can be brave doing many, many things, but when it comes to courage, you're only taking those risks for worthy purposes. And so it basically qualifies the reason, that you would take a risk or qualifies what the risk is. And that's the difference.
But I love how you mentioned too that courage thrives on intrinsic motivation, whereas bravery can be applied to actions that are done for external rewards, internal purposes, or no purpose at all.
Yeah, it really comes down to that purpose. You can be brave, and what can look like bravery to someone on the outside looking in, it could be actually for an external reward. Somebody could give you something as a result of you taking your brave action or moving forward in a brave way, and it would still be considered brave, and that's all well and good. But courage, when we take courageous actions, we are taking them for an internally motivated purpose. And what those purposes are, just for sake of clarity, they're values aligned purposes, or you're doing something for autonomy or mastery, or you've got some real purpose behind it. So if it's not internally motivated, if it's not aligned with your values, if you're not doing it for mastery, then it could look like bravery, but it probably isn't courage.
How about fearlessness? That's not courage, even though courage could be a path to fearlessness.
It is. So let's just define what fearlessness is. So, when we talk about fearlessness, what we are talking about is a lack of fear. And fear, as we many of us know, it is our natural biological response to a perceived threat. So, when we feel like, man, if we say this thing and we could really create some tension, that's a threat that can be perceived as a biological threat. So fear is very natural and we feel it quite, easily when we are doing something risky. The thing with courage is, or let me just say this, fearlessness is like the end goal, it's the end game. Okay. It's meaning that you have managed your fear to zero. There are two ways in which we reach fearlessness. One way is that you are acting hastily, you're acting rashly. And so, what that means is that you haven't actually given a lot of consideration to the action you're about to take. So, you haven't given the thought necessary for that feeling of fear to even come up. That's rash behavior. The other way is you become a master. You've done something so much to where you have managed your fear to zero. Well, when professionals in the workplace, when they want to take risks, when they want to take courageous action, what usually ends up happening is they're not the masters yet. So they haven't reached the point of fearlessness. They're not being silly or stupid. So they're actually thinking about the risk involved. And so fearlessness really isn't, an option that surfaces easily. The option that helps us take the action is courage. So you can have fear despite the fear being there. You're going to take a risk for a worthy purpose. And that's the pathway that many of us have to choose to be courageous in the workplace.
That's really good because once a person has conjured up that courage to do something over and over again, you're right, they can manage the fear for that particular action to zero, which makes them get to fearlessness.
Absolutely.
So, one of my favorite words in the entire English language is tenacity. I like it a lot better than resilience. I identify well with it, but tenacity is still not courage. Explain to me the difference.
Well, when we think of tenacity, and I don't have Webster's dictionary open in front of me, but when I think about tenacity, I'm thinking about persistence. I'm thinking about perseverance. I'm thinking about that just, dogged energy, like keeping the wheels in motion. You're gonna keep going. And that's what I think about when I think of tenacity. But even when we think about tenacity doesn't necessarily require that there is a risk present. You could go forward on an action, you can keep trudging through, but there's nothing that says a risk has to be present. And for courage, a risk is absolutely necessary. If there is no risk involved in the action that you want to take, there is no courage necessary for that action. Risk is very central to courage, and so we need it. And so tenacity, I think it's broad. It definitely means that we're going to keep going, but it doesn't mean that a risk has to be a part of that definition. With courage, we need a risk and we need a worthy purpose.
That's a great distinction between the two. Love that. Let's talk a little bit about why people aren't acting more courageously at work. You give some great reasons as to why. And I think the number one reason that I've seen, at least, and one of the top four that you mentioned, is a lack of support.
Yeah, I really think based on the research that I've done, the professionals that I've interviewed across industries from tech to marketing to education to manufacturing, what I've come to understand is that people really want to leverage courage in the workplace for really one of two things, and that is to be seen or be heard. So there's some idea about a new process that they have, or some new perspective or unique perspective that they have. They want to share that and they want to be heard or they want to be seen. Oftentimes, I'm talking to professionals of color who don't feel like they're seen in the rooms that they occupy, or I'm talking to people who just feel really different from the conventional kind of environment that they find themselves in. And so they want to be seen. A lot of times, what I hear is that people really don't feel the support for their courageous ideas and perspectives that they want to share. And I hear this from people who have maybe tried one time. They maybe tried to speak up or show up one time and got shut down, or maybe they tried it another time and shut down. And so what ends up happening is they stop trying. They stop speaking up, they stop stepping up because they're not getting the support from their leaders that they need. So in creating a courage ready culture, which is what I like to call it, where people are actually equipped to step up and speak up, you need support in order to be able to do that.
So support, fear of unknown, fear of failure, and the fear of rejection also come into play. I would say especially fear of rejection because I know personally when you are a courageous leader, it's going to happen, right? And that fear of rejection can really hold you back from doing things courageously because you're catastrophizing certain things. You're assuming the worst. No one really assumes the best. They assume if I speak up, if I make this courageous act, someone's going to really be upset with me, or I'm going to not be perceived in the right way.
So, when it comes to rejection, I think the best thing that professionals can do for themselves, that we can do for ourselves, is to reframe it. Because, as you said, it's going to happen when we're taking risk and putting ourselves out there. Failure, and I'm putting air quotes around failure, is bound to happen, or rejection is bound to happen. So, one of the things that we can do to better position ourselves to accept rejection is, number one, first tell ourselves it's not us that's being rejected. If we're sharing a new idea, it might be the form in which the idea was shared is maybe not being accepted, but we ourselves are not being rejected. So that separation is really important and necessary. And the other thing that I would say is reframing rejection is important. So reframing it as, maybe the way in which this happened or I presented it gives me information that helps me to present it again in another way. So using the information from the rejection or reframing it can also be really impactful and helpful.
You have on your site, which I love, this graph that identified, what do you want courage to do? And you identified, I think, several hundred National Society of Leadership and Success conference participants, and you got some results, which I thought were pretty informative because, it's great to identify and to kind of get some clarity around what are they hoping that they can do if they're a more courageous leader. And number one was stand or speak up for yourself. Number two was face fear of rejection or failure. So stand up and speak for yourself is so critical these days, and courage is at the foundation of that.
Courage is at the foundation of that. I believe, one of the things that I talk about in my work is that we all have our own brand of brilliance, meaning that we're all brilliant in some way. Your brilliance could be about your unique way to craft strategies and vision for your team and your company, or it can be your connection or your communication skills. We're all brilliant. And so what we're all trying to do really in the workplace is we're trying to express that brilliance. And the brilliance is really trying to be expressed through what we say, what we do, and how we do it. And so many people want to advocate for themselves in the workplace. They want to advocate for their unique perspective, and they want to advocate for their unique skills and talents and show and demonstrate them in the workplace. But that can be really hard to do depending on the environment that you find yourself in. And that's where we talk about that support being really important for people to take risks. And so, yeah, advocating for yourself, speaking up for yourself, giving critical feedback, giving feedback to other people, asking for help is another thing that I see professionals want to do that they have a hard time with. Because usually when we're asking for help and it's hard for us to do, we're equating that with coming across as looking incompetent, needy, or weak. And so finding the courage to advocate for ourselves absolutely is something that professionals want to do. And so the work that I do, because I know this, the work that I do is make it easier for professionals to do that. I really want to make it easier for professionals to take worthwhile risk. And that's why I'm doing what I do. Let's even talk about what courageous leadership is. If you're a courageous leader leading a team, then what you're really trying to do, and you want your team to be courageous, you want your team to take risk, then you're trying to, and what you want to do is equip them to take risk. You want to give them the support, the ability, and the desire to take risk, worthwhile risk. And you can impact all three of those things as a leader. And if you're saying things, you don't care how they come across, you're probably not creating that supportive environment. You're definitely not impacting your team members' a desire to act courageously, and you're not really giving them the ability. So when we talk about courageous leaders, here's what we're really talking about. We're talking about people who have the gift, we can call it a gift or we can call it an ability, to really guide themselves and other people, the people around them, to direct their skills and their talents to a common purpose, but they're doing that in the face of risk and uncertainty. So if we're just sharing things to share them, we don't care how they come off, we don't care how people receive them, then we're probably not doing a great job of getting people to direct their talents and their energy to a common purpose in the face of uncertainty. So all of this is connected and all of it matters.
That's great insight with courageous leadership because you're right. They need to be perceived the right way, and they need to keep that in mind as they're acting as a courageous leader, not just saying things for the sake of saying them. Just saying that I'm being honest. Here's a courageous statement, and it's coming across as being rude. You have a simple formula to start conjuring up the courage to do something, which I love. And that's the first step is ask, what do I want courage to do? Second step is understand what is the risk or fear in front of me. And then the third step is clarify, am I worth the risk?
Yeah, I think that there are important steps that we can evaluate to get closer to courage. So we know courage is a choice to face a risk for a worthy purpose. So the first thing is, yeah, what is the courageous action you want to take in the workplace as a leader of people, as a leader of yourself? What is the courageous action that you want to take? It could be to revamp something, to change something that's been in place for a very long time that people are attached to. It could be to go to your boss, your leader, with a new idea that seems off the wall that you fear rejection. So, what is it that you want the courage to do? We have to clarify what that even is first. And then after we clarify it, yeah, the next question that you do need to ask yourself is, okay, what exactly is the risk? And a lot of times when we think about risk, especially when we're taking a courageous action, we think about all the things that could go wrong. So we're thinking about, I could lose my job. I could alienate the person that could help me. I could fail. All the things that, we have mentioned, we think about all the things that could go wrong. And that's really important to do, but there's another side of this that's really important too. And that's we have to look at the risk of not taking action. That's something that our brain is not going to do for us automatically. We have to give intentional effort to thinking about what is the risk if I don't do this. So once you evaluate that risk, which a lot of people don't do, once you evaluate the risk, you then move to the next step, which is okay, well, why am I taking this risk? So if we're opening ourselves up and exposing ourselves to lots of things that could go wrong and lots of things that are uncomfortable, we have to know why we're taking the risk. And the risk, when it comes to courage, we better be taking the risk for an internally motivated purpose. So we're doing it for mastery, autonomy. We're doing it because it's values aligned. We need to know if we're taking risks. The thing that I like to say is if we end up taking courageous action or trying to do something risky for a primarily externally motivated reason, courage is not gonna it's not gonna be around that long because courage doesn't like external motivation. Courage likes internal motivation. And then once you do that, you have to ask yourself, do I have the resources that can help me persevere through the risk? Because at the end of the day, courage doesn't guarantee that you're gonna succeed. It doesn't guarantee that things are going to happen the way you want them to happen. And so, if those things happen that you don't want to, if you do fail, if you do embarrass yourself, if you are uncomfortable, do you have the resources to work through that? And this is where resilience comes into place, but this is really where competence, your know-how and your skill and your confidence come into place. And so those are the steps in kind of a nutshell. Those are the things we want to evaluate to get closer to courage.
I love how you said it too, that being courageous doesn't ensure success, right? You still have to have the resilience on the back end if it doesn't turn out the right way. But I think there's also certain mindsets that you can remember when you're trying to act courageously. And that first mindset we touched upon, focus on winning, not trying to lose. Because acting courageously has never been and never will be synonymous with being safe. This means that those who want to express ourselves authentically and honestly need to take a chance on ourselves and make a new pitch or take an otherwise worthwhile risk that we need. And we need to have this mindset in place.
Yeah, I think that's really critical, and it's a simple perspective shift, but I think it's a really important one. So often when we're in the workplace and we're leading new initiatives or we're trying new things or we wanna step up in new ways, we can understand those things to be risky, and a lot of our energy is focused on trying not to lose. I know this is risky, but I'm gonna try not to fail. I'm gonna try not to be rejected. I'm gonna try not to have a negative evaluation by doing this thing. But that's energy spent on something that you actually want to avoid. And so, what if we took some of that energy, if not all of that energy, and shifted it towards thinking about what it would look like if we do win? What it would look like if I put my energy and effort towards, being successful, going through the process that we just talked about, understanding the risk, understanding my reasons, and understanding that I have the competence and confidence to move forward. So it's a simple perspective shift, but it's a very powerful one, using your energy, not necessarily using it all up on the things you want to avoid, but the things that will help you win.
Another mindset shift that I see happen not near enough with leaders is focusing on comparing themselves to the former versions of themselves, not to other people. And that is so difficult to do in today's society. Give us some tips and strategies that would maybe help leaders do this more effectively.
Well, I just want to say when we're leaders of other people, we're leaders of team, we first have to understand that we're leaders of ourselves. And that's where leadership starts. It starts with leadership of yourself. And so this is a very personal one. But it can be very, very easy to look around and see what other people are doing in other departments or in other companies and want to mimic and want to replicate what they're doing. And you can also start to feel really unsatisfied with yourself and what you've been able to accomplish when you're looking around and seeing what other people are doing. And that's not helpful. It's not helpful to you in moving forward and helping your company position itself for a future, for success in the future. It's not helpful to your team members when you're constantly looking around. What's needed instead is we need to look at our growth. And so the only way to really look at your growth personally as a leader is when you're comparing yourself not to other people, not to your future self as a leader, but you're looking at your prior selves or your previous selves so that you can see the progress that you made and you can use that as fuel to keep moving forward. So that's one that I when I'm coaching, I really like to, it's something that we unpack on many levels when we're dealing with personal obstacles that are keeping us from moving forward and doing the things that we need to do is we're comparing ourselves in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. And it's so easy to say, so difficult to put into practice when you've been conditioned your whole life to not focus on the previous versions of yourselves, but on the other things that matter. The other mindset that really matters that was the most counterintuitive to me, and perhaps you can unpack it for me and for the listeners, is stop following rules that don't exist.
Yes, this is one of my favorite things to remind myself of, and I love reminding leaders of this too. So often in the workplace and in the world too, we follow rules that are really not rules. When we think about rules and let's just, make this easy. So let's think about you stop at a red light or you stop at a stop sign. These are rules that I think everybody can resonate with. But what ends up happening is we create all these other rules in the workplace and we end up following them. For example, one of my dear friends, is a CEO of a charter school network in Chicago. And she was thinking about moving on from her position, moving on from her job. But one of the things that she said before she really was going to consider it is, I need to have at least 4 years in this position so that I can put it on my resume. And so this is a rule that or this is something that I constantly think about. So I asked her, I said, so who told you that you have to have 4 years on your resume in this position? And she thought about it and she was like, actually, nobody. Nobody told me that. There's no rule that says that. But that's just a small example of what hundreds of thousands and millions of professionals do around the world every day as we make up these rules and we end up following them. And so what happens is we stunt our own growth and our own progression as leaders because we're following these rules that don't even exist. And so it's a powerful question that you can ask yourself because oftentimes when I even feel stuck and like I'm struggling, I ask myself this question, and usually what comes up is I'm actually following a rule. I'm trying to do something like somebody else. I'm trying to, live out a timeline that somebody else has. I'm following some kind of rule that is a make believe made up rule.
Great question to ask. I'm going to start asking, have I handcuffed myself with any self imposed rules? For me, it's kind of that pressure to be perfect and to do so much. It's a great way to bring it up to your consciousness level, right? And remind yourself daily so you don't keep being handcuffed or hurt by these rules. And really, they're limiting your potential and growth.
That's right. That's exactly right. Powerful question.
Wonderful. Thank you, Candace, for joining me today on the program. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
You can find everything about what I'm up to at my website, candacedoby.com. That's probably the hub and the best place to go.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.